It's a Monday evening. Good evening wherever you are. It is time for Motivation Mondays. As you know, with Standard Bank, we are running this couple of conversations with influential chartered accountants from within the Standard Bank stable. And our aim is, of course, to motivate those of you that might be writing exams coming up, whether it's CTA exams or even your board exams, just to have some insights from those who have done it, us find out from them what it's taken for them to get there, and perhaps if you have particular issues that you'd like to raise, questions that you'd like to pose, this is an opportunity for you to engage with us. So here it is. The next 30 minutes is all about how to become a chartered accountant, how to thrive in a very challenging industry, and if you have any particular issues that you'd like to pose, then do so. Last week, we launched this. We spoke to Lee John, and obviously that was a conversation that a lot of you gave us some good feedback on the types of things that we raised. Now, today is a bit of an interesting one because, I was once young. You might not be able to see it right now, but I was once young. And when I was young, I went to university. And when you get to university, they are the seniors, the people that are ahead of you, the people that you can always ask and say, so how did you master auditing 2 and auditing 3? So I also used to do that when I was a student. And today, I actually get to speak to one of my seniors. So Thembelihle Ngema was actually my senior at university at Howard College long ago in the early 2000s. I'm not going to say when exactly because that might expose her age, which is something that is very delicate. But here she is. Thembelihle, good evening.
Evening, Khaya. How are you?
I'm excited because now I'm thinking back to those days when we were young, Howard College. I was at Mabel Palmer, those were the interesting days. But just take us through the story of how you ended up at Howard College in the first place, how you decided to become an accountant, and how you ended up, unfortunately, having to be stuck with people like me.
No, awesome, Khaya. So I'm born and bred in Durban, Mlazi, eThekwini. So did all my schooling there and eventually got to matric, and I had applied for an engineering entrance, which I got in, but also applied for accounting. And so I wasn't very sure, and so I was listening to you last week and you were talking about being an accidental accountant, and I think I'm probably one of those. And so I sort of scaled it down to be like, I thought that becoming a CA actually gave me, because I was unsure, it gave me opportunities to actually decide later where I actually wanted to end up. That's actually how I ended up doing an accounting degree. So as you said, it was back in the early 2000s. Went to Howard College. So, the big thing then for me was funding. Yeah. So KZN was the easiest entrance in terms of varsity. I remember my mother hustled hard to get me into that year, and she sort of, I always say I'm a fan of unsecured lending because part of my sort of funding for that year was on a loan that she had had from her bank. She also then hustled hard in terms of getting sponsorship for me through her union because she worked in a factory back then. So that was my sort of start into just getting entry in terms of Howard College and doing a BCom degree back then.
Yeah, the interesting thing about KZN, I don't know if this happens universally, but in KZN we used to be able to fill in one application form that could go to all other different universities. CAO. And for a lot of us, that was like the thing that made it happen, because imagine having to try to raise application fees for 6 different universities, particularly when you're at the stage in matric when you're still not sure about what it is that you want to do. So then saying, well, in case it turns out my results are good for engineering, let me put an application there. So I think that type of forward thinking by the KZN universities as they were back then to say, well, actually, let us centralize it, let us have it as a one point of contact. It saved a lot of us a lot of money. And I think also perhaps it assisted in ensuring that, at least all the institutions knew that by the time it gets to them, it's gone through these particular processes. And that was something that I found quite useful. And I was quite interested that when I moved up to Johannesburg, it wasn't a thing that is practiced universally. And you're thinking, well, this is actually one of the simple, easy solutions that South Africans came up with years ago. But here we are. It's still not a universal practice. I'm
actually not sure, hey. And it's funny you say that because I actually thought that actually continued. I actually thought, throughout the country that something like CAO existed. I think, back then, I think it was about 150 Rand or whatever the case may be. And, you had 150 Rand and you knew that you're going to select 5 options or whatever the case may be. And somehow one of them will, be one that you'll be accepted in. So I think it was awesome. And it is something that I think going forward should actually be considered, because I think that entry thing is a big thing, and something like an entrance fee might seem small in terms of our context now, but it's still, for a lot of South Africans, a big a big deal.
And you know what I usually tell people is that we've got this very strange phenomenon in South Africa where people migrate from one form of poverty to another. So if I'm born into poverty and I obviously cannot afford school, the government is happy to pay for me through basic education. So up until matric, I'm covered because, you know, schooling is free. And then at that transition point where I suddenly now need to be able to access university, suddenly, well, I'm no longer the responsibility of the state because I'm not in basic education. And higher education institutions are saying, well, we are only going to be able to deal with you once you get here. So that point of me trying to transition from basic education to higher education, it is quite problematic because if a person hasn't had, you know, the ability to pay the 200 Rand school fee, now for them to then raise 200 Rand for each university that they want to apply to, it could be 1,000 Rand, and then there's the additional cost of printing documentation and getting it. It's still a huge unit cost. And that for me talks to the idea of access still not being universal, because you're thinking, well, if the government already knows everybody within the basic education system, can't they just feed that information generally to the universities and then say, well, according to your results, this is where your chances are, select it, and then let's move on? How are you not dealing with such easy social wins?
And I think, and it's a very valid point, right? Because, you know, we live in a country with lots of smart people. So innovation, we don't actually like, we don't lack innovation. And I do think, Khaya, that it is something, it's a very complex subject. And, you know, and I think over the years, you know, stuff, you know, NAFSAS, as an example, has played a huge role in making sure that there is access to higher education. But I think those small bits that might look insignificant actually go a long way. And therefore, I think we do need all of us to play a role. And I think for me, sometimes it's almost like you can't leave it to the government. You can't leave it to corporates. I think it's absolutely all of us has a role to play. And so for me, that's sort of sometimes what I just, you know, really think we all need to, especially us that have gone through the ranks. It's almost like it actually comes with a responsibility. Is how do you actually make sure that we make this thing accessible for more people, you know?
You know, I mean, the type of sacrifices that people actually had to make in order for us to get here. I mean, when we spoke to Lee John yesterday, it was one of his high school teachers that then said, well, where are you? What are you doing? And then it's like, I'm struggling with this. And then she's like, okay, here's an opportunity. And a lot of us have those types of stories. And you mentioned earlier on that your mother was like, whatever it takes, I'll go to that mashonisa, I'll go and confront my union in order for my daughter to stand a chance. And I think those types of sacrifices actually then put this particular responsibility on us to say, dear God, if I screw up this year, my mother's got an unsecured loan at 40% interest rate that her ID, she hasn't seen it in months, because, you know, the mashonista is like, we're going to keep your ID or your bank card so that you can make sure that you pay. I mean, those types of sacrifices that individuals make anywhere you look in order for people like you and I to get this particular opportunity. These are things that we still need to be done more universally, because there's that one person sitting at home today thinking, I want to be in that particular environment, I want to be at that institution. But until somebody comes and says, here's that application fee, that person might never become part of the system.
No, absolutely. And I think you're right, Khaya. And, and for me, it's that it's just carrying the responsibility for all of us. And it's also just not being shy to ask, you know. I think sometimes it's also about putting our hands up. It's about, you know, putting our information into Phoenix where we need to, or really just really exploring all these different avenues where, you know, this kind of help is actually offered. So I think it's a two-way street. It's really knocking on doors as hard as you can. Don't actually give up. Reach out to people, you know, and then on the other side, there's other people that really need to carry the responsibility to make sure that we make this more accessible to others. Yeah.
So there's this thing that the guys at UCT always used to emphasize to me, to say, just be aware that access without the right prospects of success is meaningless, because you can put people into the system, but if they don't have the right support ecosystem within the university itself, then it becomes a waste in resources. And the reason they always wanted to highlight this to me is that there is an element of immorality associated with taking a person from a particular environment burdening them with a loan, for example, when you know that actually their chances of ever getting that degree do not exist, because what do they have at the end of 2 or 3 or even 4 years? Nothing more than a long loan statement and nothing else to show for it. When you were at university, what type of support systems did you tap into to say, well, my mother's made this sacrifice, she's taken this particular loan, I can't afford to mess this up, but I can't do it on my own because I've never heard of what auditing is. I mean, the fact that you considered engineering indicates that you're probably a maths and science person. So it's like, this huge paradigm shift of having to then master debits and credits. And that understanding or that presence of mind to remember that you need to be able to be supported through the system. The home environment plays a particular role. The university environment plays a particular role. What are the big influences for you that simply got you over the line?
So I think, I think my mom, to your point, she hustled hard to make sure that I get in. So that was her thing. But she almost was like, okay, you're in, good luck, you know, because she couldn't actually offer any further support after that. So for me, first year was really hard. First year was just like, it was... it was, I thought I was smart, but when I got to first year, I was like, ish, okay, no, there's levels to this thing, So I struggled in the first year. I think for me, probably the best things for me was the type of friends I made. For me, I think that was probably the biggest, the most important choice that I made that really helped me from a support perspective. So I had incredible friends who worked hard and had awesome work ethics. They came from, these... there was, there's these schools back in KZN, like the boarding schools, and somehow these kids, like the kids from these boarding schools like worked hard, and so those are the people that I hung out with, particularly from second year. So for me, we had this tight-knit network where we figured things out together, we struggled together. But I had people around me. And so for me, that was probably my biggest support system. So I didn't have anything outside of that. It was really my friends. If we didn't know, one of us would know, or we'd really hustle hard together to make sure we find the answers.
Yeah, the importance of just getting that right social ecosystem cannot be understated, because it could have all turned out that you hung out with the type of friends that are like, it's a Thursday, let's go out to Jubes, because Jubes used to still have a thing. I think they closed it down, but Jubes used to be like the great temptation they would all have, and you'd be thinking, after Thursday tutorials, let me consider going to Jubes. But just surrounding yourself with the right support, the people who sort of have the same commitment to the idea to say, we'll make these sacrifices, we'll avoid going to Jubes, because at the end of the day, I want to be able to afford to go to Jubes. I want to be able to afford to buy Jubes at some point in time. And perhaps for me to get there, I simply need to make this particular sacrifice. And I think obviously now you're a mother, and you're obviously now trying to impart some of these learnings onto your children in particular. But when you look around at the people that are sort of trying to become chartered accountants and you have to interact with them, do you then get the same idea that actually they have this understanding that it sounds long, 7 years sounds long, but it's important sacrifice. And the reason I say 7 years sounds long, I think I was one of those who was tricked, because somebody said, if you want to study medicine, it's going to take 7 years, but if you want to study accounting, it's 4 years. Look at this idiot going to study accounting, because I'm like, I'm not going to do 7 years, only to get there, and they say, actually, it is 7 years. That ability to understand the sacrifice that is necessary in order for you to get the reward in the long run. How do you articulate that to young people?
Yeah, I think, for me, I think the big thing is keeping... it's a long game. Do you know what I mean? It's a long-term game. And so you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to, it's almost like you almost have to shut things off and just don't keep the goal out of sight. It's going to be hard. You're going to feel like you're missing out on life. Our circle was really a boring circle. Like, we didn't know much. The
nerds.
we didn't know much. It also helped that we didn't have a lot of money, so we could actually do a lot. So I think sometimes being broke is actually not a bad thing, because we didn't have money, so you studied, and so for me it's just keeping, it's okay, you miss a couple of parties, but you'll go to better parties at some point. So it's just, you're going to have to let go of some stuff during that time, and just keep your eyes on the goal. Yeah,
I think, that sense of discipline, I suppose it never ends, because it's a discipline within the context of you being a university student. But now, here you are as a person running a very important division, head of finance, well done, and also having to manage a family and also your own social life, because sometimes people forget that even as parents, people still have to actually go and hang out with their own friends. Your friends are not the 2 or 3 year olds that you're raising. Getting that balance right, how do you navigate through it? particularly now in the context of us not knowing the boundaries between work and home because, well, we've been kicked out of our offices. So now our homes have become our offices and you're sitting there, it's time for generations at 8 p.m. You're like, that sounds like I should be with my family, but here I am still doing spreadsheets. How do you get that balance right between saying it is now time for Standard Bank to take a backseat because it's now time for my children? How are you getting there?
Yo, Khaya, it's hard. So I have to be very honest. It is absolutely hard, and I think this year in particular with COVID has been particularly hard. You know, my husband is probably watching, so he'll be
He better be watching.
he'll be writing notes of this is what you said. So it's been, I have to admit, it's been very hard. But I think for me, what's important is, so firstly, I think, you know, we, from a family perspective, there's principles that we've agreed on in terms of how we want to live our lives and what is actually priority. So that's very important to me, and he keeps me accountable to that. The second piece is I really do work hard to create boundaries. And for me, those boundaries, I think, as an example, I think weekends are very much about family and spending time with my family. There are weekends where I have to work, you know, but it's not going to be the entire weekend. I think the significant amount of time on the weekend is about, my kids, you know, and my husband. And so Saturday morning is about making pancakes with my 3-year-old, because that time is really important. During the week, you know, it's long hours, and that's just what it looks like. And it looks like that. And it fluctuates, right? Because it depends on what's happening at the time. But there's certain times where I have to break it off. So, you know, 6:30 to around 8 o'clock, that's when we bath the kids. That's when we have dinner as a family. And then if I have to continue doing some work, then I'll do it after that. So for me, you know, I wouldn't say I've got it all figured out. And I think I've had to learn to firstly be kind to myself, forgive myself where I don't actually get it right. And also just get the sense that, this thing, you know, I'm evolving and I'm also learning, and I need the supports at home. So, so having a spouse that understands what you're trying to do and how you're trying to grow, and having, you know, our nanny is like the most important person to me, just because she enables absolutely everything that I do. So that's how I try to do it. I don't see my friends as much as I used to be when I didn't have kids, because there's just simply isn't enough time. But it is something that, you know, outside of COVID, you would, you know, do it more often than what it actually looks like in the last couple of months.
You know, the one thing about COVID that I've sort of been trying to get my head around is when we then start counting the cost and you talk about the social and the economic casualties, I have a fear that these conversations that you and I are having represent an echo where you've been able to carry on working from home, so therefore there hasn't been an economic interruption as far as you're concerned. I mean, life has gone on, you're still able to earn an income. Some of us are still able to do that. But I think my fear is that far too many South Africans this past 6 months have been hell. Not only because, you know, the labor market was so fragile to begin with, the economy was so fragile to begin with, but because now this has been the type of reset, this has been the type of crisis that then says the incumbents of the economic system, the ones that have access to a laptop, access to Wi-Fi, you guys are going to gallop ahead and move on, but the others are being left behind. And for a country struggling with pre-existing inequalities, my fear is that when you do the data analysis of what this past 6 months have represented, we'll find ourselves having diverged rather than converged. And I'm worried about that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Khaya. And I think for me, that probably hit me hard when we were in the thick of level 5, level 4, because if you had forgotten about the inequalities, it became very apparent when you looked at the queues at people collecting SASSA grants where there's no social distancing, where you realize just the impact that inequality still exists within our society. So, like for me, you even see that within your own families, right? So in as much as, you know, I might have progressed, you know, you still have families that, you know, are still taking a taxi in Mlazi to go to town, you know, and you think through this and you're like, you know, there's no social distancing, but they actually don't have choices that I might have. And so I actually agree with you. I think the impact and the work, you know, that us and the government have to do post this crisis is going to be huge. You look at those unemployment numbers, you know, and we know that they're actually probably even worse than what we see today. So I think we've got our work absolutely cut out for us, because the impact is huge.
I live in fear of us actually having to then just get to confront the cold hard data, because I think it's going to indicate to us that unless we come up with a massive plan of turning things around, a massive plan of doing things differently, then we'll find that our society's fragility points are actually going to be amplified. And I think it's always a point that perhaps those of us that grew up in the township environments or even rural environments, you know, every year you go back and then you look around and then you say, but what does it all mean that, you know, I'm in that particular part of the economy, and yet the people I grew up with, the people I grew up around are still battling every single day to even answer the simple question of, so where does the loaf of bread come from? And I think for me, it's not only just a COVID problem, but it's something that South Africa needs to really confront, on the basis that in the absence of us being able to answer that question objectively for everyone to know when their next loaf of bread is coming from, this is how a social uprising tends to manifest, and it becomes a collective responsibility, not of government, because government has got limited resources and limited capacity, but of individuals to then say, what is my role in society? What is it that I'm doing in order to make that particular difference? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, like I think for me, I think the big thing for me is having a level of consciousness. I think it's important for all of us to actually carry that on a daily basis. And I think the big thing, it really is about, you know, those that have much. For me, you know, I truly believe that much will be expected. So for me, Khaya, it's, you know, the important thing is to be able to, I must be able to influence, you know, in my sphere, whether it's, you know, within, you know, my circle in terms of my family, making sure that, you know, the lady that helps me at home, by the time that she leaves, you know, helping my family, that she has a better life, you know, that she can study during this time. So it's almost, I think for me, it's living with that consciousness, to not actually forget that there's a world out there, right? So we live, you know, within these estates with, you know, high walls, and you can actually forget, you know, until the time that you go home, what's actually happening around South Africa. But it's actually living with that consciousness that I think for me is important, and actually doing something about it. And sometimes it might feel like it's really small contribution, but it's still key to be able to do that. And I think if all of us do it, it makes a huge difference. Because we're all here because somebody, you know, you know, whether it's gave you 150 rand or whatever the case may be. So I think collectively that role will become even more important going forward.
Got a couple of interesting questions for you from the guys on Facebook. One of them is somebody who may be exposing childhood skeletons. And Thembelihle, a childhood friend of yours, she's posed a question, but it's got nothing to do with childhood skeletons. She wants you to give more insights into some of the solutions that the bank is implementing. And I think particularly in light of where we are right now, where suddenly the things that we thought were the normal way of interacting and transacting have been interrupted. So how agile has the bank been in saying, actually, this is how we respond to this? And then there's also another question that asks, how would you motivate someone who's about to write their CA exams, whether they're writing, you know, CTA exams or even ITC or even APC, because for once it's actually all happening at the same time. I can't even keep up about which exam is when.
No, cool. Those are great questions. I think the first questions are in terms of what the bank has done. I think, sure, there's been quite a lot that the bank has done in the last couple of months. I think a lot of it has actually been around awareness of making sure that customers know that they can actually do things on our digital platforms, that they don't actually have to go to branches. You know, I think in the last couple of years, we've really done quite a lot of work to make sure that we absolutely digitize all the things that people used to do in the branch. You actually don't need to go, you know. So for us, it's been about educating clients to make sure that they don't go to, stay home. You know, literally stay home. You don't actually have to go anywhere to do your banking. So that's been a huge deal. And also, it's also been a lot of, you know, making sure that we help our customers, right? Customers have been under strain, like we were talking, you know. People are losing jobs left and right. So there's been quite a lot of work in make sure that, we give relief to customers whilst they're going through, you know, this time. Because these are customers that we know, you know, you're Khaya, we know, we can see what's happening in your account. So I think, so those are some of the just two ways that we've made sure that we are there for customers during this time. And then in terms of the second question on how do you study for an exam? I think for me, the biggest thing was, there's a big piece around time management and actually just setting out, you know, what your plan is from now till the time that you write exams, make sure that you don't just start with the easy stuff, because sometimes I think we like doing the subjects that, we're actually quite good at first and not so much the ones that we really struggle with. So make sure that, you prioritize appropriately, that you spend sufficient times even on, the subjects that you find quite challenging. Ask for help. Like for me, that's a big thing. Like don't struggle on your own. So as you prepare for the exams, where you need help, you must absolutely ask for help. And the other big piece, Khaya, which, is something that I also realized later on, that whole thing on exam technique is everything, because very often you've studied, the information, it comes to the exam, you really battle because, you really struggle from an exam technique. So really just learn what the key exam techniques actually are. We used to be told, read required, like really spend a lot of time on the required, because very often you just missed what the question was actually about. So those are probably some of the few points that I would advise a person to do as they prepare for the exams.
Those are key things. I always ask people this question of, when you wake up every day and you say, I do a job, there's a purpose behind it. And I always say you should be able to articulate this purpose from the prism of the self, the community, and society at large. So when you wake up and you say, I'm going to work, and one of your children says, so when you go to work, who does it matter to? How does it play into what you want to be as an individual, what it means to you as an individual? What does it mean for society? Will South Africa notice if you're not doing the job tomorrow? And what does it mean just in general when we then say, we have somebody called Thembelihle, she's a head of finance for personal and business banking at Standard Bank. Who cares?
So I think for me, one of the most beautiful things about waking up and coming, well, we don't come to work anymore.
You're supposed to.
We
dialing
don't
in.
When I dial in at home to work, I think one of the most beautiful things, and we always talk about this, is our purpose, right? Africa is our home, we drive her growth. And I think for me, that links very closely with what's close to my heart. I think for me, one of the biggest things in my heart is, how do we actually see South Africa grow? How do we see South Africa prosper? How do we see, people prosper? So for me, one of the biggest things that really helps me wake up every day and do what I do, firstly, it's, I've got an awesome team that I work with. And what excites me is seeing people grow. I thrive in that. I thrive seeing, people that, we've seen through the ranks move into bigger opportunities. And for me, I'm in a role now where I can actually influence some of those decisions. Now that's exciting. That for me really makes me feel like I can make a difference. So I can make a difference in terms of the people that I work with. I can make a difference in terms of the things that we do for customers, because I actually have a voice that can influence what we do for customers and how we serve customers. And for me, I'm just like, all of that actually makes South Africa grow, and that's sort of how I see it. It's not just banking, hey. It's not just, we're not just giving loans, we're helping businesses grow, we're not just giving unsecured lending, we're helping Dikhe's mom send Dikhe to school. So I think there is a bigger purpose, I think that, as a financial institution, we make revenue. Yes, we do. But I also absolutely think that, there's a huge purpose that drives what we do. And for me, it links to my personal purpose. And that's really what keeps me going. And that's what's kept me here in the last 11 years.
Oh, it's been 11 wonderful years, and this feels like a reunion of Howard College peeps. So other people from other universities, you can also have your own reunions. This was a Howard College conversation. But Thembelihle, thank you very much for joining me. And I think obviously for a lot of the students that might be listening in that wanted to hear your story, then they at least have some better insights into who you are and what drives you. And we're hoping that one of them or two of them may then say, there's the type of story that got me to revive the hope, revive the dream as they head towards their exam. So thank you very much for joining me. Guys, you know how the drill works. On Friday, 5:30 p.m., we're talking technical matters. So we'll be talking ITC. So if you are writing the ITC in the next couple of months, do tune in at 5:30 p.m. on the same Facebook page. And until next week, Monday, when we carry on with another Motivational Monday, have a good evening. My name is Khaya Sithole. Thank you.